What's up, guys, and welcome into Breaking Boards and episode number 1 of Stacking Boards. In today's episode, we are going to take a look at the first contest over on DraftKings for the NFL season for 2025. We're going to do an in-depth player-by-player breakdown for the Dallas Cowboys traveling to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. If you get something out of today's content, please drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, as I'm going to be doing in-depth player-by-player breakdowns for every slate headed throughout the NFL season over on DraftKings. Super stoked to have you guys along for the ride. And without further ado, man, let's jump into the player-by-player breakdown for the Dallas Cowboys traveling to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. So as we are thinking about showdown lineups over on DraftKings, the first thing that we are going to do here is we are going to take a look at the team totals and the game total for Thursday night. It looks like over on FanDuel currently, I am recording this on Friday, August the 29th. Currently, the game total is set at 46.5, with the implied team total for Philly at 27 and the implied team total for Dallas set at around 20. So about a touchdown dog here to Philly on the road. The next thing that we want to take a look at is identifying who could we look at to be a captain in our lineups. So as we take a look at things here at the top of our board, again, to keep in mind, if you haven't played before or just as a refresher, whoever your captain is on DraftKings, you do get 1.5x their fantasy points, but they are 1.5x the salary as well. I do think there are 8 viable captains that we can take advantage of this week, and we're looking at Saquon Barkley, Jalen Hurts, CeeDee Lamb, A.J. Brown, Dak Prescott, Devonta Smith, and George Pickens. No huge surprises there. Our 8th captain may come as a bit of a surprise, as I typically do not do this, but I would take a look on Thursday night at the Philadelphia Eagles defense. The next thing I do, taking a look at week 1, is just doing a little bit of a refresher of what lineups should look like. So last year, and shout out to ETR and more specifically Cody Main, put together a chart identifying the player breakdown by position for what we saw in the top 1% of finishing lineups in 2024. And taking a look at the QB position, 57% of top lineups had one QB in their lineup, and 37% had 2 QBs. At the running back position, 47% had one running back on their roster, and 25% either had 2 running backs on their roster or 0. At the wide receiver position, we saw 2 wide receivers in 43% of the top 1% of lineups. 29% had 1 wide receiver, and 20% had 3 wide receivers. Looking at the tight end spot, you typically want to go with 1, as it was on 48% of the top 1% of finishing lineups. 32% had 0 tight ends, and 18% of the time there were 2 tight ends on a roster. Looking at the kickers, 54% of the time there was not a kicker on a roster, and 41% of the time there was 1 kicker on a roster. You typically do not want to double up on kicker. Now, looking at the defense, 67% of the time there was not a defense on the winning roster, and 30% of the time there was 1 defense on the top 1% of finishing rosters in 2024. And now that we've caught up a bit on how to play Showdown and what a roster should look like, I want to do a team by team and position by position breakdown. So we're going to look at the Dallas Cowboys first, as they are on the road and 7-point dogs. And we're going to look at the QB position and Dak Prescott. Prescott is priced at 13.5 in the captain spot, and he is at 9K for the flex. I do think he is captain viable for this contest. However, if I was going to put him in a captain spot, I would also want 2 of his pass catchers. So we're going to look at Dak with CeeDee Lamb, with George Pickens, with Jake Ferguson. Also, don't mind throwing the kicker in there. Jaden Blue is a bit of a pass-catching running back. Javonte Williams can pass catch a little bit. You also have guys like Tolbert. Kavonta Turpin is a big sleeper for me in this contest on Thursday Night Football, as I think he's going to get some rushing opportunities as well. But more specifically, looking at Dak and this Dallas passing offense heading into 2025, I'm really high on them overall, and I do think there's going to be some weeks that we're going to really take advantage of Dallas in this passing attack. But I don't think that week one in Philly, as they're getting awarded the trophy for last season's Super Bowl, I don't think that's a spot I want to take advantage of this Dallas passing offense. This is a Dallas team that they don't really have much to speak of, and we'll get to this more later. In the running back area, I mean, they have Javonte Williams and a few other just Jags, just another guy. But I don't think that they're going to be able to take to the ground, as often as they might like in 2025. They also just shipped out yesterday Micah Parsons to Green Bay, so that's going to soften up that defense. I think this is just going to be a team they're going to be passing a lot in 2025. And talking about Dak more specifically, I mean, I don't think this is a spot where he's just going to thrive. I don't think he's going to put up a dud. I don't think we're going to see a 5, but I also don't think we're going to see a 32 that we saw in week 3 of last season. I have him at around 16, 17 fantasy points in the spot. Much prefer him in the flex. I'll probably have around 3% or so in the captain spot just to kind of sprinkle it in. But if we're looking here, I mean, he doesn't have the rushing upside that he once had. I mean, he had 30 yards was his max last season, but he also had a -1, a -1, a 1, a 3. I mean, you guys get the point. He's just not running as much as he used to. So I'm not going to have him in the captain spot much. Like I said, around 3% ish. And actually, in my preliminary run of 250 lineups to start off, I got him in 2% of my lineups. So I do want a little bit more than that. I want about 3%, 4%, but it's not something that I'm looking to get, 5, 10, 20%. And I do think he comes in around the 6 to 10% owned in the captain spot over on DraftKings for the $15, I believe it is, million up top. So I'm going to be under the field at the captain spot again, around 3-4% on Dak Prescott. As we take a look at the running backs for the Dallas Cowboys, they brought in Javonte Williams in the offseason. They added Jaden Blue in the draft. They got Miles Sanders from Carolina. And then the only one that I can consider outside of that would be Lupke, the fullback here for Dallas. I'm not high on any of these guys, and I don't have any of these guys projected for more than 10 fantasy points. They're all within, I have Lipke at about 1.1, 1.4. And then these guys are all in the 5 to 9 fantasy point range. I'm just not sold on these guys, and I don't really know what the breakdown is going to look like. So that's something, if you feel comfortable that you have a good handle on this running back situation, play into that, because I promise you, not a lot of people will really have a lean one way or the other. I don't really know who's going to start this backfield off. I assume it's going to be Javonte Williams. I assume he gets around 40, 45% of the work. But I do think they're going to mix in Jaden Blue, and I do think they're going to mix in Miles Sanders, which is going to cap the upside for each one of these 3 backs. I will have 0.0% of captain ownership for either of these guys in Thursday Night Football's contest. With that said, pulling up my optimizer here and just looking at my percentages, in my first run of 250 lineups, I had 12% Javonte Williams. I had 4% of Lupke. Let's see, scrolling down through here, 4% Miles Sanders and Jaden Blue at 6%. So not high on any of these running backs for Dallas. I do think they're just pieces you can sprinkle in. And again, if you're sent from the future and you have this thing figured out in Dallas and their backfield, and you have some kind of conviction play, please lean into that. If I were going to lean into it, gun to my head, I had to pick one, I would pick Javonte Williams. But been down that road before, been burned down that road before. And, I think his max fantasy output in this game, 10, 12 points. And these guys are also taking on a Philly defense that allowed the second fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position in 2024, the second fewest rushing touchdowns, and they allowed 0 passing touchdowns to running backs in 2024. Looking at the wide receiver position for Dallas, we have CeeDee Lamb, we have George Pickens. Scrolling down a bit here, we have Jalen Tolbert, Cavante Turpin, and I think that's pretty much just going to do it for we have Flournoy. I forgot this guy they drafted last year. So I think he is fantasy viable for this game and could see a catch. So marking him off the list first, he's going to be absolutely just a flex play, basically free for salary. I'd put him at about 1.2, 1.6 fantasy points. Next up, I want to talk about Jalen Tolbert. Again, not a captain option, but I do think Tolbert, we're probably looking at around, 4 to 6 fantasy points. I think they mix him in. He's probably going to see a little bit of action in 3 wide receiver sets. So I think he gets a couple of catches, and I do see Dallas playing from behind most of the game. Next up, I want to talk about George Pickens. I think I had him at 14.6 projected points in my original run. I do think, getting him worked in, they're going to look to target him and kind of show off the new toy, especially with Jerry Zigo, and they just traded again. We talked about it earlier, Micah Parsons yesterday. So I do think they try to feed him the ball. I could see him getting in the end zone. So if he gets in the end zone, you might be looking at 19 fantasy points or so. So there is a little bit of leniency or a little bit of room there on Pickens. So if you're high on him, again, he will be one of my captain options. Next up, we have CD Lamb. I mean, what's not to like about CD? I mean, I think I had him at like 18 fantasy point range. If you told me he scored 30 in this game, I wouldn't be surprised. He's an obvious captain option. When you're putting any of these guys in your lineup, you're going to want to put, if you're using CD and you're using Pickens in the captain spot, you definitely want to pair alongside Dak in the flex. The only player that we haven't talked about yet on this list that I would hold as a little bit of a reserve is I do think you can play Kevontae Turpin. I do think he's going to mix in the rushing game, and I do think he's going to catch a couple passes in this game as well. With this offense being the way it is, they need a playmaker, and that's exactly what this guy is. You also are going to get the kick returns, the punt returns, so if he just happens to fall into a punt return touchdown, you're going to get the 6 points for that as well. So I don't mind pairing Turpin up. He won't be a captain option for me, but I don't mind pairing him up with, Dak, or I don't mind having him in a lineup without Dak in it, in the flex spot. I don't mind pairing him up with the defense. That way, if he happens to run one back, you get the double whammy of points there. You get the 6 points for Turpin. You get the 6 points for the defense as well. So a double hit there, given that he is a return man. So I don't mind pairing up in the flex Turpin and the Dallas defense. So again, Flournoy, Turpin, Tolbert, all going to be flex options for me. Don't mind putting Pickens or Lamb in the captain spot. I think I had, talking about projections, I think I had CD Lamb at around 17, 18 fantasy points. I had Pickens around 14. Tolbert was in the 4 to 6 range. I do prefer Turpin to Tolbert, which is probably going to surprise some people. And then Ryan Flournoy, I had him at 1.2 or 1.6, I believe it was. And looking at my first run of ownership for those guys, again, running my first 250, I had CD Lamb in the captain spot 6% of the time, and I had George Pickens in the captain spot 3% of the time. Looking over at the flex, I had Pickens in 42% in the flex. I had CD Lamb at 32% in the flex. Did get mixed in about 6% of Ryan Flournoy. I got 6% of Tolbert as well. And then I have 18% Kevontae Turpin. Looking at the tight end position for the Dallas Cowboys, we have Jake Ferguson, we have Schoonmaker, and we have Spanford. We can go ahead and knock out these two bottom guys. Even for this game, I'm not really looking at Ferguson as an option for the captain spot. Interestingly enough, Dallas and Philly were the top 2 best defenses in the NFL last season for defending the tight end position. So I'm just going to avoid tight end, altogether in this game, really, in the captain spot. So I'll mix in Jake Ferguson in my flex, as well as Shoemaker and Spanford. And looking over at my optimizer, obviously having 0 in the captain spot. Let's see here. We have Spanford at 4%. And we had Jake Ferguson at 8% and Shoemaker at 1%. Again, not over the moon on either one of these guys, and I'll look to be under the field on Shoemaker and Spanford, and around about the field on Ferguson, maybe a little under there as well. Talking about the kicker spot for Dallas, normally I love Brandon Aubrey, but this just isn't a situation with Dallas playing from behind, 7-point dogs on the road, outside stadium. I'm not high on Aubrey this week. I think he probably scores somewhere in the fine range. He's probably going to get you somewhere between 6 and 8 fantasy points, but I don't think it's anywhere where he's going to get you 20. So I would not consider Aubrey at all in the captain spot, but I will mix him in the flex. Don't mind taking him. It's just not going to be my first go-to. I prefer Jake Elliott in this game to Aubrey. And again, talking about Dallas's defense, we talked about them a bit earlier with Kevontae Turpin. And if you have a lean again with the Dallas Cowboys running backs, you can always pair the Cowboys defense along with a running back or Turpin for me as he is returning kicks. Not high on Dallas's defense overall in this game. Losing Micah Parsons yesterday just takes away their ability to get pressure, which they didn't do that great anyways, especially whenever Parsons was off the field. So I don't think this is going to be a situation where we see any kind of like ceiling outcome for the Cowboys defense. I would not consider them at all. I would not get cute, even in the largest contest with the Cowboys at the captain spot. There'll be a flex option only for me, and I'll be slightly under the field to around the field in ownership on the Cowboys defense. Switching things up a bit and looking at the Philly side, at QB, we have Jalen Hurts, probably my favorite captain play on the board for the game. As we look at last season, Dallas gave up the most fantasy points per game to the QB position in 2024. They gave up the most rushing touchdowns. They gave up 10 of them on the ground to the quarterbacks. And efficiency was a big thing when you're playing against Dallas, and that's just what Jalen Hurts does well. And then, again, you factor in the loss of Micah Parsons. I just think this is a spot where Jalen Hurts could eat and could really do some damage to this Dallas team. He is my favorite captain. I think I had him projected for like 24, 25 fantasy points as a baseline, and I think my ceiling on him was like 42. And he will be one of my top owned captains on the slate, along with a couple of guys we're about to talk about. If I do have him in the captain spot, Hurts is a little bit different than most quarterbacks, if not all quarterbacks, in that I don't have to have a pass catcher, associated with Hurts. Odds are one game slate, you're going to have it anyways, but I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to exclude that I can't have a lineup that has Hurts in it naked. Looking at the running back position for the Eagles, we have Saquon Barkley up top. As we scroll down, we have Will Shipley, and then they added in the offseason A.J. Dillon. I think we can consider Barkley as a top captain. He might be my top overall captain. Dallas was not good against the run last season, and just bringing in Kenny Clark, I don't even know if he plays. Maybe he does by Thursday, so I don't really see him being meshed well with the rest of the Dallas line. So I will be above the field at the captain spot on Barkley. I will be above the field in the flex on Barkley. And the same thing is going to go for Will Shipley. I don't mind playing him here as well versus this weak Dallas rushing defense, which allowed the 10th most fantasy points per game to the running back position in 2024 and the 7th most rushing touchdowns. And again, that was with Micah Parsons on the team. Not huge on A.J. Dillon, but I will have a projection on him, typically around 2 fantasy points ish. So he'll be mixed in the flex spot. Looking at the wide receiver position for the Eagles, we have A.J. Brown, we have Devonta Smith. As we scroll down a bit here, we have newly acquired John Mechie from my Texans. We have Jahan Dotson, and then as we scroll down, I believe the last guy is Cooper. Probably talking like 0.1 fantasy point projection for Cooper. I don't see Philly having to take to the air very often in this game. I do think they'll be uber efficient. Jahan Dotson, don't mind him in the flex, will not have any in the captain spot. Same thing with John Mechie, will not have him in the captain spot, but will mix him in the flex as well. And for the 2 top guys, I will look to be slightly above the field or around the field on Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown. Once the projections come out for ownership for the week, I'll take a look at those and I'll be around about the field on Smith and A.J. Brown. Again, don't mind putting Smith and Brown in the captain spot. If you do use Smith or Brown in the captain spot, you want to make sure that you have Jalen Hurts in the flex in those lineups, as these guys aren't going to be scoring on the ground. Taking a look at the tight end position for the Eagles, you have Dallas Goedert, you have Grant Calcaterra, and you have Kylan Granson over from Indy. These 2 guys on the bottom, well, actually, all 3 of these guys will just be flex options for me in week 1. Don't like going against the Dallas defense. It was pretty good. I think they were number 2 in the league against the tight end position in 2024. Don't really see a lot of upside in this game for Goddard, as they're not going to be passing a lot anyways. So we're probably talking about 1 to 3 fantasy point projection, and then probably like an 8 fantasy point projection in PPR for Dallas Goedert. But none of these guys in captain for me. Looking at the kicker spot for the Eagles, we have Jake Elliott. He's a fringe captain spot guy for me. I don't think I'm going to get to any of him, but if you did, I wouldn't mind it. I would say if you're going to use him in the captain spot and you don't want to be duped by a million lineups, make sure you leave a little bit of salary on the table. And if you're playing Showdown, NFL content, NFL DFS, whatever, please don't be afraid to leave any amount of salary on the table. If you spend 50K in these larger field contests, you're going to be duped. And finally, closing it out with the Philly defense. This is a play I'm going to use a lot. I'm going to be very, very, very heavy over the field on the Philly defense. I mean, you have an offensive line here for Dallas that is ranked by PFF as the 23rd overall offensive line headed into the 2025 season. And you have a defensive line that is ranked second in the NFL for Philly. I just think this is a spot where, and if we look at last season, I mean, these two teams played twice. 19 fantasy points and 20 fantasy points. Could that happen again? Yes. Is it guaranteed to happen again? No. But I'm willing to push my chips in on the Eagles defense. I just think this is a spot where they're going to get pressure. You know, you have Dak coming back off that long injury that we talked about. They're going to be working in a new head coach, new play calling. Brought Pickens in. I feel like they're going to be trying to force feed him the ball, which could lead to a turnover and maybe a pick six. This running game is just a zero, so they're not going to have to stack the box against Dallas. I think they're just going to get pressure whenever they want on this Dallas team. The Eagles defense is a captain option for me. I do think I'll have around 4% if I'm doing a 150 set on the Eagles defense in the captain spot. Very high on them here. I love pairing them. If I have Saquon captain, having them in the flex. If I have a couple of Will Shipley, which I might have in the captain spot, I haven't decided yet. I'll have some Eagles there, but I'll probably flip it where I'll have Eagles captain and Shipley a lot in the flex on those lineups. So definitely going to be higher than the field over on the Philadelphia Eagles defense. And just looking at my first run of my first 250 lineups, some guys that I think I'll be around the field or slightly over the field. Going to be over or even with Saquon, Jalen Hurts, Dak, George Pickens, A.J. Brown, Eagles defense, Will Shipley, Jake Elliott, Kavonta Turpin, Devonta Smith, and CeeDee Lamb. Going to be over or above on all those guys in the flex. And if we're talking about the captain spot, I want to be even with the field on CeeDee Lamb and Devonta Smith. Also want to be even with the field on A.J. Brown and George Pickens. Want to be slightly under on Dak Prescott. I want to be slightly over on Jalen Hurts and on Saquon Barkley. And surprisingly, I'm going to be over on Philly's defense in the captain spot. And that's going to do it for the in-depth breakdown for Thursday Night Football's first game of the season between the Dallas Cowboys and the Philadelphia Eagles. Hope you guys enjoyed the content. If you did, drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, as I'm going to be doing breakdowns just like this one throughout the NFL season over on DraftKings. And before you guys head out, please let me know in the comments who's your favorite captain for Thursday night. Glad to have football back. Glad to have you guys joining me. I hope you enjoyed the content, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks.